Good afternoon, my friends, and welcome. This is Father Marcus from the Costa Blanca Anglican Chaplaincy. Delighted that you've joined me. Just a little presentation this afternoon, wrestling with one of the big questions that some people have. Let me just give you a little bit of background. My dad was a doctor, and his brother was a dentist, and his other brother was a chemist. And so I have in my genes, as it were, a scientific, medical structured background. And before I was ordained, I worked in the accident and emergency theatres, operating theatres at Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead in London, and I absolutely loved it. It was a fascinating job, and I was absolutely moved beyond anything else I've ever experienced when one day I had the opportunity to go and watch a post-mortem. It sounds gruesome, but for me it was fascinating. I believe, honestly, that it was probably the most religious experience I've ever had. I don't want to go into the gory details because it may make you feel a little bit queasy, but we looked at the brain of this young man who died, and we opened up his whole body and took out all of his organs and looked at them and examined them and explored them to find out what it was that was the cause of his death. The actual cause is he'd fallen over and banged his head on the ice. He slipped backwards and smashed the back of his head, but they needed to know whether or not there was something else that caused him to fall. The reason it was a religious experience is because the whole inside of the body was incredibly fascinating. The heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, they all had been functioning and doing what they do. And the mind, the mind, I mean, we couldn't go say what was going on practically in the mind, but it was full of imagination, it was full of concepts, it was full of ideas, it was storing incredible information. The heart was just beating and beating and beating and beating and beating, and it just knew what it had to do. And I had this experience that made me think this just couldn't have happened by accident, that there was something that prompted this to come into being. And for me, that was God. And what we're talking about today is those people who have a love of science or an interest in science or even just a cursory glance at science and think, okay, we don't need religion anymore. We don't need God anymore because science has provided us with all of the answers. The Big Bang. Something happened 35 billion years ago or however many years ago it was, and creation came about and it was evolution. Therefore, we don't need God. And sometimes people who say things like that look at the story of Genesis and say, look, it didn't happen like that. Well, Christians look at the story of Genesis and say it didn't happen like that. They equate the story of Genesis as things that point to the fact that there is something behind the whole ongoing process of creation. For me, the story in Genesis and the concept of the Big Bang and evolution fit very comfortably and happily together. In fact, I can say very clearly that for me, religion and science fit very comfortably together, and they're not at war with each other. They're trying to embrace one another, and there is as much mystery in science as there are in religion. They just have different questions and different answers. Science may explain how things work and what happened. Religion tries to get us to think about why. And there's so many things that science can't conceive of, and yet religion tries to. Neither of them have all of the answers, and both of them have a certain fluidity about them. In this pandemic, the government has been saying in the UK that it's been guided by the science, but we know that science has moved and changed and developed because the scientists are exploring something new. And in our own spiritual journey, we understand more about our relationship with God and what it means to be a follower of Him as we go on our religious or spiritual path. There may be some teachers who've got it all sewn up, but there will be other teachers who will suggest that we have a sense of continual looking and studying and understanding of our relationships. And so they're both fluid. And what I'm going to suggest is that science is brilliant. I am a great fan of science, absolutely a great fan of science. It is science that's going to find us the answers that are eventually going to get us out of this pandemic. And we're longing for it. And we will give thanks to those scientists. Yes, we will. And we will rely on them. And it's the scientists and the doctors who are keeping people alive in hospitals, and the nurses who are treating people and looking after them so well. And so I'm not against science. I'm not against scientists at all. What I am against is people who use a very small amount of knowledge of science who then say we don't need God or we don't need religion. For me, they fit hand in glove together. And what I would say is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because science has got some answers doesn't mean to say that religion hasn't got something to teach us and to share with us. Just going to finish with a little story. There were these scientists, and they were able to create life. And they created life. And then they said, God, we don't need you anymore. We know how to do this. We can make life ourselves. And God said, I'm amazed. I'm absolutely fascinated. And I'm so excited for you. I'd love to see how you do it. So show me how you did it. So the scientist said, okay, well, first of all, you gather together some dust. And God said, get your own dust. I love it. There's always one more question that we can go to, one more step back that we can take. And my hope is that we just allow ourselves to think that the story of faith has got something to teach us. And I personally believe it is absolutely worthwhile. Absolutely worthwhile. I'm going to say bless you, bless you, bless you. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again next time. Bye.